There's a certain kind of silence in the country that you can't find in the city. It settles on your skin, feels heavier than air, and leaves you straining to hear the tiniest rustle or creak. My husband, Tom, always said I was just imagining it, that my city-bred ears weren't used to the natural stillness. But ever since we moved into this farmhouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that something here was listening. Tom and I had been looking for a place to settle down for ages. After our wedding, we spent months browsing apartments in the city, imagining our lives there, the kinds of people we'd meet, the jobs we'd take. But then we stumbled upon this old farmhouse listing online, a sprawling, weather-beaten relic set on a huge, isolated property at the edge of town. It was bigger than anything we could afford in the city, and even though it had clearly been neglected, I felt a strange pull the first time I saw it. "You sure about this place, Lucy?" Tom asked as we drove down the winding dirt path that led to the house, dust kicking up around our car like fog. The house loomed in front of us, tall and shadowed, with chipped paint and windows that seemed to stare back at us. "Looks like it could fall apart in the next big storm." "I don't know. It just feels right," I replied. I could see him shaking his head, that lopsided grin sneaking onto his face. He knew me well enough to realize I'd already made up my mind. The first few days were busy. We spent our time scrubbing down the kitchen, tearing out old carpets, and patching up cracks in the walls. We laughed a lot, finding odd little things tucked into corners. An ancient tin of buttons, a faded Polaroid of a couple who looked vaguely like us, an old key with no lock. The house had a strange charm, and the isolation didn't bother us. In fact, it felt like a blessing. But that's when the sounds started. It was late, a few weeks after we'd moved in. I'd just crawled into bed after a long day of painting, and the fatigue in my muscles pulled me into sleep almost instantly. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I heard it. A soft, barely there scraping noise, like fingernails against wood. I blinked awake, staring into the darkness, convinced it was just a dream. I rolled over, tugging the blankets up, but there it was again. Scratch. Scratch. It sounded like it was coming from the wall right behind our bed. I nudged Tom, but he mumbled something about raccoons and pulled the blanket over his head. I lay there, straining to hear, but the noise stopped as suddenly as it had started. After a few minutes of silence, I chalked it up to the house settling and finally drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I barely thought about it. Tom was in high spirits, already up and ready to tackle the yard, talking about maybe building a little garden. The sound, that little scratch, 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 seemed like an absurd worry in the bright daylight. But then it came back that night, and the next. Each time, it grew louder, as if something was working its way closer, scratching just on the other side of the wall. I tried to ignore it. Tom joked about it, saying I was just looking for some excitement out here in the quiet. But a few days later, even he couldn't deny it anymore. We were sitting on the couch one evening, watching a movie, when the sound echoed through the living room wall, a hollow, steady tapping that made my skin crawl. "All right," Tom said, turning off the TV and standing up. "Enough's enough. Probably just a critter that got stuck in there. I'll go grab my tools." But there was no raccoon, or squirrel, or stray cat. Tom pulled open a section of the wall by the stairs, his flashlight casting eerie shadows. But all we found was dust and silence. It should have been comforting, but somehow, the absence of anything there made the house feel emptier. The next night, the scratching continued, and it was louder. The sounds didn't stop. Over the next week, they grew more frequent, more insistent and strangely rhythmic, like someone raking their fingers across the wood just a few inches from where I lay each night. I was no longer just waking up to it. I was waiting for it. Every night, as I lay there, I felt my heart pound with that sickening anticipation, dread filling my veins like ice. Even Tom couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, around 2 a.m, we both sat up in bed, listening. The scratching was coming from all around us now, filling the bedroom like an invisible swarm. My skin prickled as the sounds seemed to surround us, moving, shifting, getting louder and more frenzied. It sounded like scratching, but not the kind animals made. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. "I don't know what this is, Luce," Tom whispered, his voice tight with tension. "It's not normal." We agreed to call a professional to inspect the house the next day, someone who might have experience with strange noises or old homes with quirks. The inspector arrived that morning, a tall, quiet man with tired eyes. He moved slowly through each room, tapping walls, listening carefully, his expression shifting from mild interest to something more cautious. In the basement, he lingered by the far wall, his hand tracing faint lines in the dust. "Any other owners ever mention noises like this?" he asked, his voice low. "We don't know," I replied. We didn't really ask about the history of the place, but we didn't see anything unusual in the records. He nodded, still facing the wall. "Sometimes old houses keep secrets," he muttered under his breath, barely loud enough for me to hear. After an hour, he returned upstairs, wiping his hands on a cloth. "There's nothing obvious here, nothing structurally that would cause what you're describing," he said, avoiding our eyes. "It could be just age and wood settling. Old houses are funny that way." But his words felt like lies, empty reassurances given to people who had no other option but to live with them. That night, we didn't sleep. The sounds grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just scratching anymore. There was knocking now, a slow, methodical thump that seemed to echo from the walls, like the beat of a distant drum. I could feel it vibrating under my fingertips when I touched the headboard. I didn't say anything to Tom, but in that moment, I was sure someone, or something, was trapped behind that wall, banging to get out. We moved to the couch downstairs, huddled under a blanket, trying to drown out the noise with the TV. But the sounds followed us. First scratching, then knocking, then whispers. Faint, unintelligible whispers, slipping through the walls, just quiet enough that I couldn't make out the words. It was maddening, like hearing a conversation through water, just a breath away from clarity. Around 3 a.m, I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped off the couch, stormed over to the wall near the staircase, and slammed my fist against it. "Stop it!" I screamed, my voice trembling. "Whoever you are, whatever you are, leave us alone." Tom pulled me back, his face pale. He tried to calm me down, but I could see he was just as shaken as I was. We sat there, holding each other, waiting for the sounds to start again. But for the first time in weeks, there was only silence. The next morning, we started noticing other things. Small, odd things around the house that shouldn't have been there. Our things began to go missing. A watch, a book, a scarf I was sure I'd left by the door. And then we found other items, things neither of us recognized. A rusty coin under my pillow, an old hairpin on the bathroom sink, a child's toy soldier in the middle of our kitchen floor. We tried to ignore it, but each new item left a chill that lingered, whispering to us that we weren't alone. One evening, as I was cleaning the hall closet, I noticed something odd. a piece of faded wallpaper curling at the edge of the back wall. My heart pounded as I tugged at it, peeling back layer after layer, revealing old yellowed walls underneath. And then I saw it. A name carved into the wood in jagged letters. Eleanor. It felt like an accusation, etched there long ago and left to rot in the dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever Eleanor was, she was still here, waiting. That night, the sounds returned, louder and angrier than ever. I could barely breathe as the scratching and banging filled the house. It was as if a storm had erupted inside the walls, furious and unyielding, battering against the wood like it wanted to tear through and drag us inside. Desperate for answers, I decided to do some research on the house. At the local library, I found old newspaper clippings and records from decades past. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. The farmhouse had once belonged to a man named Samuel Green, a widower who lived here with his young daughter, Eleanor. They had moved here in the early 1900s, and from what I could tell, Samuel had become increasingly paranoid, refusing to let Eleanor leave the house. Neighbors reported hearing screams and cries, but every time they called the police, they found nothing but an empty, silent home. Then one day, both Samuel and Eleanor simply vanished. Some people speculated that Samuel had taken his daughter and left town. Others whispered that the house had claimed them. But the strangest part was that, over the years, several people who'd lived here reported hearing sounds, scratches, whispers, and the faint sound of a child's voice calling from somewhere deep within the walls. I didn't tell Tom what I'd found. I was afraid that if I spoke the words out loud, it would make everything real. But that night, the noises changed. As I lay in bed, clutching Tom's hand, I heard something else. A soft, broken voice drifting through the wall behind me, as fragile as glass. "Mommy." The word tore through me, chilling me to the bone. I felt a hand squeeze mine tighter, and I knew it was Tom, but I couldn't look at him. I couldn't move. I just lay there, staring into the dark, listening as the voice grew stronger, filling the room. "Mommy, I'm scared. Let me out." I jumped out of bed, nearly dragging Tom with me. We ran down the stairs, but the voice followed us, echoing down the walls, filling every corner of the house with that plaintive cry. By morning, Tom and I had packed everything we could fit in the car, abandoning whatever was left behind. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, my eyes tracing the outlines of that house, dark and silent, waiting. And just for a moment, I thought I saw her, a pale figure standing in the upstairs window, watching us go, her mouth open in a silent scream. But it was too late. We were already gone. The drive away from that house felt endless. We didn't say a word to each other, as if even speaking might somehow summon the voices and sounds to follow us. Tom's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and my own hands shook as I clutched a blanket around my shoulders. But even as we left that place behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still clung to me, like an invisible thread tethering me to the house. I could still hear the faintest echo of that voice, a fragile whisper tucked into the back of my mind. "Mommy, let me out." We drove straight to Tom's parents' house on the edge of town. They welcomed us with open arms, confused by our sudden appearance, but quick to offer us comfort. Tom managed to explain that our farmhouse had some structural issues, and that we just needed a break. I could tell he didn't want to get into details. Honestly, neither did I. How could I explain what we'd been through without sounding like we'd lost our minds? The days passed slowly. We tried to settle into a routine at his parents' place, but I couldn't relax. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, expecting to hear scratching against the walls. Even during the day, I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd hear a soft whisper or glimpse a shadow darting out of view. Tom was trying his best to be cheerful, but he too was haunted. There were moments when I'd find him staring off into the distance, his face drawn, his hands clenching and unclenching. After a week, Tom finally sat down beside me on the bed and placed a hand on my shoulder. "We can't live like this, Lucy," he said, his voice low and weary. "That house, it's still got a hold on us. We need to figure out what happened there. We need to know why it's—" He trailed off, searching for the words. "Why it's following us." A part of me wanted to tell him no, that we should just forget, move on, leave it buried. But I knew he was right. The sounds, the whispers, the ghostly presence we'd felt, those weren't things we could simply walk away from. Whatever had happened in that house, it was still reaching out to us, like cold fingers grasping at our heels. So, I agreed. We would go back. Just once. To face it, and hopefully, put it to rest. The drive back to the farmhouse felt like descending into a nightmare. The road wound through miles of empty farmland, fields stretching out on either side, barren and dark beneath a steel-gray sky. The closer we got, the colder the air seemed to grow, until the silence pressed down around us like a thick fog. When we finally pulled up in front of the farmhouse, the place looked even more decrepit than I remembered. The paint was peeling, revealing splintered wood beneath, and the windows were coated in a thin layer of grime, making them look like hollow, unseeing eyes. It was as if the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for us to return. We stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath our weight. The house smelled musty, stale, as though it had been left to rot. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. Everything was just as we'd left it, but there was an eerie stillness, like the quiet before a storm. Tom moved cautiously, making his way toward the staircase. "We'll start upstairs," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly would disturb something slumbering. We ascended the stairs, each step creaking like an agonized groan. At the top, we made our way to the bedroom, where the noises had been loudest, where I'd first heard the whispers. The room was dim, the light filtering in through a clouded window. As we stepped inside, a chill washed over me. The walls seemed closer, the shadows darker, and the silence sharper. Tom approached the wall by our bed, the very spot where the scratching had first started. He placed a hand against it, his fingers tracing a faint indentation in the wood. I watched as his expression darkened. "There's something here," he muttered, his voice barely a breath. "Something hollow." He grabbed the small crowbar we'd brought with us and carefully wedged it between two panels of wood, pulling until a section of the wall splintered and gave way. A rush of stale, cold air spilled out, as if the house itself was exhaling. My stomach turned as I leaned forward, peering into the darkness beyond the broken wall. It was a small space, barely enough for a person to stand in, but there was something inside. A bundle of fabric, old and brittle, half buried in dust. My hands trembled as I reached forward, my fingers brushing against the fabric. It crumbled at my touch, falling away to reveal bones. Small, fragile bones. I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat, my mind reeling as I realized what we'd found. A child's bones. "Oh God," I whispered, horror clawing its way up my throat. "Tom, it's Eleanor." He stared at the remains, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. Slowly, he knelt beside the small skeleton, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the fabric that had once been a dress, now little more than rags. Beneath the bones, half buried in the dirt, was a rusted locket. Tom picked it up, wiping away the dust to reveal an engraving on the back. To my little Eleanor, forever and always. I could barely breathe. The weight of what we'd uncovered pressed down on me, suffocating. The air thick with a darkness that felt alive. This was her. She had been here all along, hidden behind the walls, trapped, her final moments spent alone in the dark. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a faint rustling whisper, like dry leaves skittering across the floor. It was coming from the wall. I froze, my blood turning to ice as the whisper grew louder, filling the room, taking shape. "Mommy, help me." The voice was clear now, echoing from the very walls around us, fragile and haunting. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as the words wrapped around me, filling my ears, sinking into my skin. It wasn't just a memory, it was her. She was still here, her spirit trapped, reaching out in a desperate, endless plea. Tom turned to me, his face ashen, his eyes wide with terror. "Lucy, we need to leave," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We need to get out of here, now." But as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the room like a gunshot. I grabbed the doorknob, twisting and pulling, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature plummeted, frost creeping up the walls, our breath visible in the air. And then, I felt it. Cold fingers brushing against my arm, feather light but unmistakable, a touch that was neither living nor dead. I spun around, but there was no one there, only the darkness, shifting, thickening, closing in around us. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, overlapping in a cacophony of cries and pleas. They echoed from every corner of the room, filling my mind with their agony, their despair. I could feel her presence now, a suffocating weight pressing down on me, the air thick with the stench of decay and sorrow. Tom grabbed my hand, his fingers digging into my skin. "Lucy, don't listen," he said, his voice shaking. "Don't let her in." But it was too late. The whispers had already wormed their way into my mind, twisting through my thoughts, seeding themselves in my memories. I could feel her, her fear, her pain, her desperate need to be free. It pulsed through me, dark and heavy, filling every part of me until I couldn't tell where her thoughts ended and mine began. "Mommy, please don't leave me here." The voice was inside me now, echoing in my mind, clawing at my heart. I stumbled back, pressing my hands to my ears, but the sound only grew louder, more insistent, until it was all I could hear, all I could feel. And then, in a single, horrifying moment, I understood. This was what she wanted. She didn't just want freedom. She wanted release. She wanted justice. She wanted the truth to come out, to be heard. And if we couldn't give her that, then she would never let us leave. Tom's grip on my hand tightened, anchoring me as the voices grew, twisting through the air, their desperate cries overlapping until they became a deafening wail. Eleanor's presence surrounded us, filling the room with an unbearable weight, as though her sorrow and rage had coalesced into something solid, something tangible. I could feel her fear, her anger, and her resentment. "Tom, we have to get out of here," I gasped, my voice trembling. But even as I said the words, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. Whatever spirit remained in this house, It was bound here, its will stronger than any door or wall. Tom glanced toward the door, his face set with a determined expression I'd rarely seen. "Help me," he whispered, his voice raw with terror. He braced himself, then threw his shoulder against the door. Once, twice. The sound of his body slamming into the wood echoed, but the door held firm, as if some unseen force was keeping it shut. Desperation clawed at me. I looked around, hoping for another way out, but the room had shifted. The once familiar space was now unrecognizable, its shadows lengthening and twisting, the walls seeming to close in. Eleanor's whispers echoed louder, filling my head with fragments of her last moments. "Daddy, no. Please." A surge of icy dread washed over me as the realization set in. Her father, Samuel Green. He hadn't been a protective father hiding his daughter from the world. He had been a monster, isolating her, controlling her, and finally, he had sealed her away. He did this to her, Tom, I whispered, the words choking in my throat. He locked her in the walls. The horror of it pressed down on me, and I felt tears slipping down my cheeks. It was too much to bear, too dark, too senseless. But the moment the words left my mouth, the air shifted, as if acknowledging the truth. A sound like a low, mournful sigh filled the room, and the whispers quieted, settling into a heavy silence. And then, we heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed from somewhere deep within the walls, a sound so dark and unnatural that it froze the blood in my veins. Tom turned toward me, his face pale. "If she's here," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, "then maybe he is too." As if in answer, the lights in the room flickered, casting twisted shadows across the walls. The air grew colder, sharp with the stench of something rotten and decayed. I could feel it now, a presence, darker and heavier than Eleanor's, lingering in the shadows, watching us with a predatory hunger. And suddenly, I knew. Samuel's spirit hadn't moved on. He was still here, lurking in the walls with his daughter, trapping her in a twisted cycle of suffering. Tom's eyes locked onto mine, wide with terror. "We have to find a way to end this, Lucy. We have to help her." I nodded, my heart pounding, but I had no idea how. We were trapped, locked in a room with two restless spirits, one innocent, one malevolent, both bound to this house by some terrible secret. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing mind, to think of a way out, when a strange sensation washed over me, a soft, feather-light touch, brushing against my hand. I opened my eyes and saw her. A small figure stood in the corner of the room, her outline pale and flickering, like a candle flame struggling against the wind. She was young, no more than 7 or 8, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight through me. Her hair hung in limp strands around her face, her dress torn and faded, but it was her expression that chilled me, a look of such sadness, such longing, that it seemed to pierce my very soul. "Mommy." The word was barely a whisper, but it filled the room, echoing in my mind. I felt a pull toward her, a deep, instinctual need to help, to protect. I took a step forward, reaching out, but the moment my fingers brushed her cold, translucent form, the shadows in the room shifted, and a dark, hulking figure materialized in the doorway. Samuel. His figure was twisted, monstrous, his face contorted with rage, his eyes dark and empty, filled with a hatred that radiated like heat. He loomed over us, his mouth twisting into a cruel sneer as he took a step closer. "She's mine," he hissed, his voice a low, grating growl. "She'll always be mine." The cold in the room intensified, cutting through me like knives. Tom grabbed my arm, pulling me back, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from Samuel's face. His gaze was fixed on Eleanor, a twisted mix of anger and possessiveness that made my skin crawl. I knew, in that moment, that he was still holding her here, trapping her spirit in the house, feeding off her fear and pain. And if we didn't stop him, he would never let her go, or us. But how could we fight a spirit, a thing made of darkness and hate? Tom glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the broken section of wall where we'd found Eleanor's remains. His gaze sharpened, and I saw a spark of determination in his eyes. "We need to give her a proper burial," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Maybe that will set her free." It was a long shot, but it was all we had. Together, we gathered the bones with trembling hands, wrapping them carefully in the remains of her dress. I could feel Samuel's presence pressing in on us, his fury building like a storm, filling the air with a suffocating darkness. But I focused on Eleanor, on the fragile bundle in my hands, on the sense of peace I wanted to bring her. Tom led the way downstairs, clutching the bundle tightly as we made our way toward the front door. The shadows in the house writhed and twisted, closing in around us, filling the air with a cacophony of whispers and growls, as though Samuel was gathering all his strength, his rage, to stop us. Just as we reached the door, it slammed shut, trapping us inside. I felt a surge of panic, but Tom gritted his teeth, throwing his shoulder against the wood until it gave way with a loud crack. We stumbled outside, gasping for air, as we broke free of the house's suffocating hold. In the cold dawn light, we made our way to the edge of the property, where an old, neglected cemetery lay, hidden among overgrown weeds and fallen leaves. We found an empty patch of ground, and with shaking hands, Tom began to dig. As he worked, I felt a strange warmth beside me, a gentle, calming presence. I glanced down and saw Eleanor's figure, standing beside me, watching quietly. Her face was no longer twisted with sorrow. Instead, she looked peaceful, her eyes filled with a gratitude that brought tears to my eyes. When Tom finished, we gently lowered her remains into the ground, covering them with earth, saying a quiet prayer. I could feel the tension in the air ease, the darkness lifting like a shroud. As I looked up, I saw Eleanor's figure beginning to fade, her outline growing faint, until she was little more than a glimmer of light in the early morning air. But just as her figure disappeared, a shadow shifted behind me, and I felt a cold, seething anger wrap around me. Samuel's voice echoed through the air, a furious, disembodied growl that sent chills down my spine. "You can't take her from me." But his words were hollow now, weak, as though his power had been drained. I stood there, feeling his presence slip away, pulled back into the darkness, leaving nothing but a bitter chill. And then, for the first time, there was silence. True silence, the kind that fills your mind with peace, with the knowledge that something dark and terrible has finally come to an end. Tom and I stood there, hand in hand, watching as the sun rose over the farmhouse, its light washing over the old broken walls, chasing away the last remnants of shadow. We left that day, never looking back, carrying with us the memory of Eleanor's sad, grateful smile. I don't know if her spirit truly moved on, or if she simply found peace in the quiet, hidden corners of the house. But one thing was certain: Samuel Green was gone, his twisted hold on the house finally broken. And as we drove away, leaving the farmhouse and its haunted walls behind, I felt a strange sense of calm, a sense that, for the first time, we were finally free. It started small. Like most things that go horribly wrong, it began with a nagging feeling, so quiet I almost ignored it. Gavin and I had been married for 5 years, and like most people our age, we'd finally bought a house in a nice suburb, the kind with manicured lawns, pastel-colored homes, and streets named after trees and flowers. We'd moved in the fall, right as the leaves were turning, and for a while, it felt like everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. The house was lovely, with big windows and hardwood floors, a yard just big enough for a garden, and even a quaint little attic with a round window that Gavin loved. There was something dreamy about it, something that made me believe the realtor's line. "You'll make so many beautiful memories here." But then, Gavin started to change. At first, it was easy to brush off. I'd come home from work and find him acting off. Sometimes it was his clothes. I'd find him in a shirt he swore he hated, or catch him wearing socks that didn't match. Little things. I'd laugh it off, say he was experimenting with a new look. He would grin and shake his head, playing along with my joke. And it was all just Gavin being Gavin, right? Then it got stranger. One evening, after a particularly long day, I walked in to find Gavin standing by the kitchen counter, chopping onions. The sight almost made me laugh. He'd always hated onions, couldn't stand the smell, and here he was, dicing them with the focus of a chef. "Since when do you cook with onions?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced up, his expression blank for a moment before breaking into a lopsided smile. "I figured I'd try something new. Thought you'd like it." I chuckled, trying to ignore the way his voice sounded just a little different. But that night, as we ate, I couldn't help noticing how he held his fork differently, or how he ate each bite slowly, as if he was savoring every flavor for the first time. The next morning, I woke up to find him gone. His side of the bed was made, the sheets tucked in neatly, just the way I always did it. Only, Gavin never made the bed. He was a throw the blanket back and let it air out kind of person. I remember frowning at the perfectly made bed, a sense of unease twisting in my stomach, though I couldn't explain why. When he returned from his morning jog, I tried to ignore the way he looked at me, almost as if he was sizing me up, evaluating something about me. His eyes seemed darker, his gaze sharper, and when he hugged me, his touch felt foreign, like the embrace of a stranger. "Did you do something different with your hair?" he asked, his fingers brushing the ends of it. "No," I replied, forcing a smile. "Same as always." He chuckled, but it was low, almost absent, as if he hadn't really heard my answer. I shook off the uneasy feeling, convinced I was just imagining things, letting my mind play tricks on me. Days went by, and the strangeness continued. He would forget things, like which shows we watched together, or how I took my coffee. One evening, I caught him staring at our wedding photo on the mantel, with a look I couldn't quite decipher. When I asked him about it, he smiled, too quickly, too easily, and said he was just reminiscing. "Remember when we took that trip to the coast?" he asked later that night, his voice distant. I nodded, smiling, until he said, "I loved when we got caught in the rain that night. How you danced in the storm, laughing." He trailed off, and a chill ran down my spine. That trip had been beautiful, yes, but there was no rain, no dancing in a storm. We'd spent most of that vacation on the beach, under blue skies. "Gavin," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "There wasn't any rain. Are you thinking of something else?" For a moment, his face went blank, like he was trying to process what I'd said. Then he chuckled, shrugging it off. "Guess I just got mixed up." But there was a flicker in his eyes, a coldness I'd never seen before. One night, things finally came to a head. I woke up in the middle of the night to find Gavin standing by the window, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. I called his name, my voice thick with sleep, but he didn't turn. I got up, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders, and moved toward him. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly. He didn't answer right away. I could see his eyes, focused intently on the street below, watching something I couldn't see. "Who are they?" he murmured, almost to himself. "Who?" I asked, frowning. "There's no one out there." He turned then, and the look on his face made my heart stop. His eyes were cold, calculating, and his expression was one I'd never seen before, not in all our years together. "Right," he said slowly, his voice sounding forced, as if he was testing each word. "No one. Of course." I took a step back, feeling an icy dread wash over me. "Gavin, what's going on with you? You've been acting strange, forgetting things, doing things you never used to do." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "People change," he said, his voice low. "Maybe I've just been rediscovering myself." I wanted to argue, to tell him that people didn't just rediscover themselves overnight, but something in his tone, in the way he looked at me, made me swallow my words. The next day, I started noticing things about him that sent cold waves of fear rippling through me. When I hugged him, I noticed his scent was different, a faint metallic smell, like old pennies. His eyes, too, seemed darker, the warmth I'd always known replaced by something cold and hollow. And his smile. His smile was no longer his. It was a stretched, joyless thing, like someone mimicking the act of smiling. But the worst part was how he'd started looking at me, his gaze lingering a little too long, his eyes narrowing, as if he were studying me, memorizing every detail. I tried to push the thoughts away, convincing myself that I was overreacting. Maybe he was going through a phase, maybe it was stress. But then, one evening, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise him. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw him through the window, sitting at the kitchen table. He was looking at a photo, a picture of me. His fingers traced my face in the photo, his expression intense, focused. I felt a flicker of warmth, thinking he was reminiscing about us, until he tilted his head and whispered something under his breath. I couldn't hear him, but the way his lips moved, the intensity in his eyes, it didn't look like love. It looked like he was trying to understand something alien, something beyond his comprehension. And then he looked up, his gaze snapping to the window, to me. I froze, caught in his gaze, and for a single terrifying moment, I thought he didn't recognize me. His face went blank, his eyes narrowing, and I felt like I was standing in front of a stranger, someone wearing my husband's face, but not him. When I stepped inside, he was all smiles again, greeting me with a kiss and asking about my day. But the warmth was gone, replaced by a cold calculation that made my skin crawl. As he wrapped his arms around me, I could feel his fingers linger, pressing into my skin as if testing, evaluating. And that's when I knew. Whatever this was, whoever this was, it wasn't Gavin. The realization that the man in my home, in my bed, was not Gavin, left me reeling. I tried to shake it off, to reason with myself. Maybe he was just going through something that he wasn't telling me about, something that had twisted him into this stranger. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This wasn't some rough patch or strange phase. This was someone, or something, pretending to be him. I lay awake that night, listening to his steady breathing beside me. Every now and then, I'd glance over, watching his face in the dim light, searching for some sign of the man I loved. But his features seemed foreign, even alien, the way they stretched and shifted with each shadow. His chest rose and fell in rhythm, but even that seemed mechanical, like a clock ticking, ticking. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed, a relief that left me breathless. He was already downstairs, sipping his coffee and flipping through the paper. When he noticed me, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're up late," he said, his tone light, but with a sharp edge. It was a test, a subtle taunt, as though he knew I'd been awake half the night, watching him. I forced a smile. Yeah, I guess I needed the rest. I busied myself with breakfast, trying to ignore the weight of his gaze on me. Every movement, every word felt watched, examined. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was studying me, like a scientist dissecting a specimen. And every now and then, I'd catch him staring at me, his expression twisted into something that looked like hunger. Then, a few days later, I found something that made my blood run cold. I'd decided to clean out the attic, hoping that a simple chore might distract me from the growing dread. But as I rummaged through boxes and dust-covered shelves, I stumbled upon an old photo album I'd never seen before. I opened it, and there we were. Pictures of Gavin and me, smiling, laughing. Only, I couldn't remember taking them. In some, my clothes looked a little too big, my hair shorter than I'd ever worn it. And in each picture, Gavin looked wrong. There was something unnatural about his expression, his smile frozen and too wide, his eyes dark and hollow. A chill crept over me as I flipped through the album. The pictures grew more distorted, more unsettling. In one, he held my hand in a vice grip, his fingers pressing hard enough to bruise. In another, he stood over me as I slept, his face barely visible in the shadows, his eyes gleaming with something predatory. I shoved the album back into the box, my heart pounding. But just as I turned to leave, I saw him. He was standing in the doorway, watching me, his face shadowed, his expression unreadable. "Finding anything interesting?" he asked, his voice low, almost mocking. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just some old pictures. Didn't realize we had so many." He smiled, that stretched, lifeless smile that made my skin crawl. Memories are funny, aren't they? They can change, twist. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on me. "Sometimes you remember things wrong, or you think you remember things that never happened at all." A shiver ran down my spine as he moved past me, his fingers brushing my shoulder, lingering just a little too long. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I felt trapped. I wanted to leave, to run, but I knew he'd follow me. I didn't dare sleep, couldn't let myself drift off, knowing that whatever lay beside me was watching, waiting. The hours ticked by, stretching into eternity, each second amplifying the tension in the air. And then, just before dawn, I heard him whisper. At first, I thought he was asleep, mumbling in his dreams. But as I listened, I realized the whispers were deliberate, sharp. He was speaking in a low, guttural voice, words that didn't make sense, like a foreign language twisted into something dark and unnatural. And then he turned to me, his eyes open, wide and gleaming in the darkness. "What are you doing awake?" he asked, his voice so low it barely sounded human. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Just couldn't sleep. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he just stared at me, that cold, predatory look slipping over his features. Then, without a word, he turned back, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. I stayed awake the rest of the night, praying for morning. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I decided to call Gavin's parents, desperate for some explanation, some reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind. His mother picked up after a few rings, her voice warm and familiar. But when I mentioned Gavin, her tone shifted, her words laced with unease. "Honey, are you sure everything's all right?" she asked gently. You sound frightened." I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. "Have you noticed anything strange about him lately?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a pause on the other end, then a heavy sigh. "Well, now that you mention it, he did seem a bit off last time we saw him. Quieter, distant." She hesitated, and I could have sworn his eyes were darker somehow. "Your father and I thought it was just stress, but now I'm not so sure." I clutched the phone, dread twisting in my stomach. "Do you know if there's any history of, I don't know, family issues?" Another pause. "Well, there was his great-grandfather, Frederick. He had some issues, you could say. People said he was strange, that he'd do things, unspeakable things. He was obsessed with trying to become something more." She chuckled nervously, as if brushing off a dark family secret. "But that's just old folklore. I'm sure it's nothing." I thanked her and hung up, but her words echoed in my mind. Something was wrong with Gavin's family, something ancient and dark, a taint that had slipped through the generations and somehow found its way into him. That night, as I lay beside him, I felt his hand creep onto my shoulder, his fingers cold and heavy, like dead weight. I stayed still, barely breathing, as his hand slid down to my wrist, his grip tightening. "Why do you look at me like that?" he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Like what?" "Like I'm something else." His voice was low, his grip unrelenting. "Something you don't recognize." I held my breath, my mind racing, but I couldn't find the words. And then he smiled, that eerie, joyless smile, his eyes gleaming with something dark, something ancient. "Don't worry," he whispered, his voice like a hiss. "You'll get used to it. We all do." I felt something cold and sharp brush against my wrist, and I realized he was holding a knife, the blade pressing lightly against my skin. My mind screamed, but I forced myself to stay calm, to play along. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I didn't mean to upset you." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes glinting with that twisted, unrecognizable light. And then, slowly, he released my wrist, pulling back the knife. But the next words he whispered sent chills down my spine. "She knew too, you know," he murmured. "The last one. She knew I wasn't Gavin." A cold horror washed over me. The last one. What did he mean by the last one? Before I could ask, he leaned closer, his face inches from mine, his breath cold against my skin. "You'll know soon enough," he whispered, "when you become her." And then he rolled over, leaving me trembling, my mind reeling with horror. The next morning he was gone. I searched the house, but there was no sign of him. No note, no clothes missing, nothing. It was as if he'd vanished, leaving nothing but the faint, lingering smell of something metallic and strange. I reported him missing, but there were no leads, no evidence, nothing. It was as though he had never existed, and maybe he hadn't. Maybe he was just something else, something that had slipped into my life, wearing the face of the man I'd once known. Weeks passed, but I never felt alone. I could still feel him, watching, waiting, lurking in the shadows, as if he was just biding his time, waiting for the next moment to slip back into my life. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a shadow in my reflection, a hint of something dark and hungry, a twisted smile that didn't belong to me. I'm still waiting, even now, listening for his footsteps, for the familiar creak of the door, knowing that someday he'll return. And maybe, just maybe, I won't be the one looking back. The days blurred together after Gavin vanished. I went through the motions, work, errands, dinners I didn't eat, and sleep that felt like drowning in black water. I told the neighbors he'd left unexpectedly, and the police had no answers, no evidence, just empty, sympathetic stares. Every night, I lay in bed listening to the creaks and groans of the house settling, my ears straining for the slightest hint of him. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, and the house, our beautiful, quaint house, felt cold, foreign, as if something ancient and malevolent had taken root. And in those sleepless hours, I began to wonder if Gavin had ever been real at all, or if he'd just been the first mask. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of the front door clicking open. I shot upright, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was silent. The hall stretched dark and still, but I could feel it. The presence of something moving, just out of sight. And the smell. That metallic tang I'd noticed before Gavin disappeared, filled the air, thick and choking. I forced myself to move, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. But when I reached for it, the screen glowed dimly, displaying a missed call. From Gavin. I stared, feeling cold dread crawl down my spine. I hadn't heard it ring, hadn't even seen the call come through. Trembling, I played the voicemail, bracing myself against the wall as I listened. "It's been nice getting to know you, sweetheart." His voice whispered, low and menacing, distorted like it was being filtered through static. "You were so much better than the last one. I'm just disappointed you caught on so soon." The line went silent, but just as I was about to hang up, his voice came through again, soft and intimate, as though he were speaking from just inches away. "I'll see you soon." A cold sweat broke over me as I realized the faint sound in the background was the ticking of the kitchen clock. He was here. I bolted from the room, my feet slipping on the polished wood floors as I stumbled down the stairs, adrenaline urging me on. The house was dark, the air thick with the stifling scent of decay. I could hear footsteps, soft, slow, calculating, moving through the house. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall, praying that I'd misheard, that this was all some sick, twisted hallucination. But then I saw him. Gavin, or whatever was pretending to be him, stood in the kitchen, his face shadowed, his body perfectly still, like a statue waiting to come to life. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had on the day he'd disappeared, but they looked wrong. Stretched, as if his body was just slightly too big for them, his limbs too long, his skin a shade too pale. He looked up, catching my eyes, and smiled. Only this time, his teeth were too sharp, his mouth stretching inhumanly wide. "Lucy," he purred, his voice thick with false affection. "You're a hard one to get rid of." I backed away, but he moved faster, closing the distance in a single unnatural stride. His hand shot out, gripping my arm with an iron strength that sent pain lancing up my shoulder. I tried to scream, but he pressed his fingers to my lips, his cold touch silencing me. "Shh," he whispered, tilting his head to the side, studying me with a dark fascination. "It's almost over. Don't make this difficult." My mind screamed, every nerve urging me to fight, but I was frozen, trapped in his gaze, in the twisted mockery of the man I'd once loved. And then, just as suddenly, he released me, stepping back with a low, disappointed sigh. "I almost wish you hadn't figured it out," he murmured, a hint of regret in his voice. "It was nice playing house." He turned, moving toward the door, his form flickering, shifting, as though he was struggling to maintain his shape. His skin rippled, dark veins pulsing just beneath the surface, and I caught a glimpse of something else. A flash of dark, matted hair, long, twisted fingers, eyes black and hollow. "Gavin!" I screamed, more desperate than I'd ever been, my voice trembling. "Why are you doing this? What are you?" He paused, looking back at me with a grin that sent shivers down my spine. "I'm whatever I need to be," he said, his voice distorted, echoing in the dark. Humans are so easy to fool, so eager to believe what you see. I take what I need, move from face to face. But you, Lucy, you caught on too fast." He sighed, and for a moment, his face softened, almost like the Gavin I remembered. "It's a pity. I would have liked more time with you." And then he stepped back into the shadows, his form melting away, disappearing into the darkness, as if he'd never been there at all. After that night, I was never the same. I moved out of the house, left the suburb, changed my phone number, my name, everything. But no matter where I went, I could still feel his presence, lurking at the edges of my life, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I saw him in crowds, a familiar silhouette slipping through a busy street, a figure watching me from across a cafe. I heard him in my dreams, his voice whispering just out of reach, his smile twisting into something monstrous, as he promised, "I'll see you soon." Weeks turned into months, and the sightings grew more frequent. Each time he looked different, a new face, a new body, but I always knew it was him. He'd left a mark on me, something invisible but unbreakable, and no matter how far I ran, he was always there, just a breath away. And then, one night, I came home to find him waiting for me. Only this time, he wasn't alone. The house was dark, silent, the air thick with that familiar metallic scent. I flipped on the light, my heart racing as I scanned the room, bracing myself for the sight of him. But instead, I saw myself. A figure stood by the window, her back to me, her posture eerily familiar. She turned, and my breath caught in my throat. It was me. Same hair, same face, same terrified expression. She smiled, that same cold, hungry smile, and I realized with a sickening certainty that I was looking at the next version, the new mask he'd chosen. You don't have to do this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She tilted her head, mimicking me perfectly, her smile widening. "Oh, but I do," she replied, her voice a perfect echo of my own. After all, it's what you would do. And then she took a step forward, her movements mirroring mine, and I knew that this was the end, that he'd found a way to replace me, to take everything I was, everything I'd fought to protect. I stumbled back, my mind racing, but it was too late. He, or she, or whatever it was, reached out, and as her hand closed around my wrist, I felt my own warmth drain away, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. The last thing I saw was her smile, my smile, twisted and triumphant as the world slipped away, darkness closing in around me. And now, I'm here, watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of the mirror, trapped in the shadow of the life I once knew. And every time I look out, I see her, living my life, wearing my face, her hollow eyes watching, waiting. For the next face, the next life, the next victim. And someday, she'll come for you too. I'd always loved urban legends. Ever since I was a kid, I'd collect stories, mysteries of places, events, strange phone numbers that supposedly led to haunted phone lines. But when I heard about the vanishing call, it was different. Most stories were obvious myths, tales people passed around in hushed whispers to scare each other at parties. But the vanishing call was unlike any of them. The details were too specific, too chillingly real. The rumor was simple. There was a phone number. No one knew the exact one, of course. But if you were lucky, or unlucky, enough to find it, dialing it would set off a chain of events that ended with you vanishing completely. Within a month, you'd be gone without a trace, not even a footprint left behind. And the strangest part? Anyone who ever mentioned you, or had known you, would somehow forget. It was easy to dismiss, of course, until I met Greg. Greg was the quiet, serious type. He worked at the same library where I did, keeping mostly to himself, but he was sharp. He'd overheard me talking to a friend about urban legends one day, and after my friend left, he asked if I'd ever heard about the vanishing call. I laughed it off at first. Come on, Greg, you're not serious, are you? He'd just given me a strange look, his usual humorless expression, even grimmer than usual. People don't take it seriously, but I'm telling you, the legend has roots. A friend of mine disappeared about 6 months ago. He'd been obsessed with this story, digging through every corner of the internet for clues. He told me he'd found the number. He was going to call it, see if it was real. What happened to him? I asked. But Greg's gaze had already shifted, his face pale. He never came back, he whispered. It's like he never existed. His family, his friends, they forgot him. All that's left are his notes, and even those are fading. His words sent a chill down my spine, and the moment passed in tense silence. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The vanishing call. Something about it stuck with me, like a shadow lurking just out of view, urging me closer. It was the kind of mystery that called to me, and I knew I had to look into it. I could already imagine Greg's warning look, but I pushed it aside. I was too curious, too eager for a good scare. Over the next few days, I scoured the internet, diving into every forum and ghost story blog I could find. Threads about the vanishing call were rare, just a few obscure mentions buried under years of rumor and speculation. Some were fragments of conversations, like breadcrumbs in an otherwise empty forest. My cousin called the number. 2 weeks later, she was gone. They say if you pick up, you'll hear your own voice echoing back at you, saying things you never remember saying. If you call it, you're gone in a month, just like that. No warning, no sign. Gone. It was half an obsession by then. My sleep was full of nightmares about endless ringing phones, voices repeating phrases that made no sense. The more I researched, the more twisted and dark the story became. And then, one night, after hours of scrolling, I found it. A lone comment on an abandoned forum, a cryptic message without context. There was nothing else on the page, no username, no replies, just a single message. To know the truth, you must listen. Call and listen to what you've forgotten. And then, a phone number. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest, a wild electric thrill mixed with dread. I copied the number onto a piece of paper, hands trembling slightly. The sensible part of me screamed to leave it alone, to go to bed and forget all about it. But the thrill of the unknown, the promise of something dark and forbidden, was too strong to resist. I waited until midnight, the air around me thick with tension, the silence pressing against my ears. I took a deep breath, held my phone in my hand, and punched in the number, my thumb hovering over the call button. I half expected the number to be dead or disconnected, some prank left to spook people. But something inside me felt certain. I knew the line would pick up. And then I pressed call. The line rang. The sound echoed in the quiet of my apartment, each ring growing louder, sharper. My heart hammered in my chest, my fingers cold as I held the phone to my ear. Click. The ringing stopped, replaced by a low static hiss. I strained to hear, every nerve on edge, waiting for something, anything. And then, beneath the static, I heard it. My own voice. "Hello?" my voice asked, thin and distant, barely audible over the static. I froze, the sound of my own voice sending a shiver down my spine. It was unmistakably me, but it sounded wrong, tired, hollow. "Hello?" I whispered into the phone, my voice shaking. "Why did you call?" The voice on the other end asked, its tone low and even, like I was speaking to myself from miles away. I swallowed, my mouth dry. I wanted to know if the stories were true. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, I thought the call had dropped. But then, the voice answered. "They're true." I opened my mouth to speak, to ask something, anything. But before I could, my voice continued, almost as if it were answering my thoughts. "You wanted answers," it said softly, a dark edge in its tone. "But some things are better left unknown." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But the voice ignored my question. "1 month," it said, a hint of finality in its tone. "That's all you have left. Enjoy it." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the screen blank, the call history showing only the time I'd called. My heart raced, a thick dread settling in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to believe it was some elaborate prank, a recording, or a trick. But the sound of my own voice, the hollow, distant quality of it, it wasn't something I could easily dismiss. The next morning I felt strange. I had vague memories of dreams, foggy images of empty rooms, voices whispering in the dark. The day went by in a blur, a strange haze clouding my mind, making everything feel surreal. I wanted to shake it off, but the feeling clung to me like cobwebs. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Friends started forgetting things we'd done together. Dinners, events, entire conversations. One of my closest friends, Emily, called me one afternoon, her voice edged with confusion. "Hey, I got a notification about your birthday coming up, she said, laughing nervously. But I can't remember when we actually met. Isn't that weird? I felt a chill run down my spine. Emily and I had been friends for years, but she couldn't remember anything beyond a vague sense of knowing me. No shared memories, no inside jokes. It was as if I'd been erased from her life, bit by bit, until only a thin thread remained. And then, a week later, my mother called. Her voice was soft, uncertain, as though she was speaking to a stranger. I just wanted to check in, she said, a forced warmth in her tone. I had a strange dream about you last night, and it made me realize I can't remember where you are, or even what you do. I know you're my daughter, of course, but I don't remember. Her voice broke, a slight tremor in her tone. I hung up, my hands shaking, my heart racing as the reality of it hit me. I was disappearing. Bit by bit, my life, my connections, my memories were being erased. I tried to reach Greg, but he wasn't picking up. It was like he, too, had begun to vanish from my life. I searched for him, driving to the library, his favorite spots around town. No one had seen him in days, and his phone was disconnected. And then, as I sat alone in my apartment, my phone rang. I looked at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. It was my own number calling. Hands shaking, I picked up, pressing the phone to my ear, bracing myself. But this time, there was no static, only silence. And then, my voice. You were warned, it said softly, almost regretfully. Some things are better left unknown. And before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone in the dim light of my apartment, the screen blank and silent. I could still hear the voice, my voice, echoing in my head, its cold warning replaying over and over. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. This was no prank, no trick. Whatever I had triggered with that call was very real, and now it was coming for me. Over the next few days, things spiraled. I was starting to forget things, important things, simple memories that felt like they'd been there my whole life, only to vanish like smoke. When I tried to call my best friend to tell her what was happening, my mind went blank. Her name, her face, every detail was just gone. I rushed to the mirror, gripping the sink as panic clawed up my throat. My own reflection stared back at me, looking pale, drawn, my eyes hollow and haunted. But even as I looked, my face seemed strange, foreign. Was that even me? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a stranger, or maybe something that wasn't quite human. That night, the dreams returned, only they were worse. I found myself wandering through endless empty rooms, walls pressing in, voices echoing around me. In every dream, a phone would ring, the sound piercing and insistent, until I was forced to answer it. I'd pick it up, my hands trembling, and hear that same cold voice on the other end. "You've wasted so much time," it would say, disappointment dripping from each word. "Soon there will be nothing left of you, nothing at all." And then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, gasping for air, the sound of the phone ringing still echoing in my ears. A week passed, and things only got worse. People were starting to look at me strangely, like they couldn't quite place me. I went to work one morning, only to find my desk cleared, my nameplate gone. When I confronted my boss, his face went blank. "I'm sorry," he said slowly, staring at me like he was trying to place a face he'd seen only once in passing. "Have we met?" I tried to explain, my voice shaking, but his expression remained distant, confused. No one in the office remembered me. Even my ID badge seemed to have vanished from the system. It was like I had never worked there at all. Panic settled over me in a cold, unyielding wave as I stumbled out of the office, my mind spinning. I called my mother, desperate for some familiar voice, something to ground me. But when she picked up, her tone was strained, distant. "Hello?" She answered cautiously, like she was speaking to a stranger. "Mom, it's me. I stopped, the words dying in my throat. I couldn't remember my own name. I tried to grasp at it, to hold on to something, anything that was mine, but the memory slipped through my fingers like sand. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice growing colder. "I don't know you. Please don't call again." The line went dead, leaving me alone in the silence. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, my thoughts a tangled mess. I had to find Greg. He was the only one who might understand, who might know how to stop this. But his number was gone from my phone, and I couldn't remember where he lived, even what he looked like. All I had was that gnawing, desperate certainty that he was somehow tied to all of this. He had warned me, after all. I paced the apartment, the room closing in around me, my mind filled with fog. I couldn't remember what day it was, or what I had eaten that day, or even if I had eaten at all. The only thing that felt real was the terror gnawing at me, a sense that I was slipping further away, bit by bit. And then, as I sat in the darkness, my phone rang. The screen was blank. No caller ID, no number, just the sound of the ringtone echoing through the empty room, relentless, pulling me in. My hands trembled as I picked it up, pressing the phone to my ear, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" There was a long pause, filled only with static, and then my own voice answered, hollow, distorted, like it was coming from some deep, empty void. "You're almost gone," it whispered, its tone mocking, taunting. "Soon, there will be nothing left of you at all." "Why?" I choked out, my voice breaking. "Why is this happening to me?" "Because you wanted to know," it replied smoothly. "Curiosity. Isn't that what brought you here? You wanted to understand, to feel that thrill, to know if the legend was real. And now you do. You made the call, and the call has taken you." "What? What are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking, panic clawing at my chest. But the voice only laughed, low and cold, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. "I'm everything you fear," it said softly. "I'm the empty space, the shadow in the corner, the darkness that waits. I'm what you become when there's nothing left of you. Soon, I'll be all that's left." The line went dead, and the silence closed in, heavy, suffocating. I stared at the phone, the weight of its words pressing down on me, leaving me gasping for air. But before I could even process what had happened, I saw it. My reflection, in the black screen of the phone. It wasn't my face staring back at me. It was something twisted, hollow, eyes dark and empty, a mouth stretched into a mocking, hungry smile. It watched me, unblinking, its face a pale, distorted echo of my own. And as I stared, frozen, I saw its mouth move, forming silent words I couldn't hear. But I knew what it was saying. "I'll see you soon." The next morning, I didn't recognize my own apartment. The walls looked different, the furniture somehow wrong, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. My memories were fraying at the edges, pieces of my life slipping away faster than I could hold on to them. I glanced in the mirror, but the person staring back at me was a stranger, her face hollow, her eyes dull and lifeless. And then I heard it. Faint at first, but unmistakable. The phone was ringing again. I didn't want to answer it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone, to ignore it, to throw it out the window. But the ringing grew louder, filling the room, filling my mind, until it was all I could hear. I picked it up with shaking hands, pressed it to my ear, and waited. The voice on the other end was mine, but it sounded tired, strained. "Hello?" it whispered, my voice barely audible over the static. And then I realized I was the voice on the other end. The call had looped back around. I was speaking to myself, the me that had dialed the number that first night, the me who had wanted answers, the me who had been real. "Don't call," I tried to say, but the words came out twisted, garbled. Don't answer. You'll disappear. It's too late." But I knew she couldn't hear me. She had already made the call, and soon she would vanish, just like I had, her life unraveling, her memories fading, leaving only an empty shell in her place. As the call ended, I felt myself slipping further, the last shreds of my identity dissolving into the void. I could feel the presence on the other end, a cold, dark thing that had taken my face, my voice, my life. And as I faded, I realized the truth. The vanishing call wasn't a curse. It was a cycle, an endless loop, claiming the curious, the reckless, those who sought out answers to forbidden questions. Each caller vanished, leaving nothing but an echo, a ghost of themselves trapped in the darkness, doomed to lure the next victim. The last thought that flickered through my mind, dim and fading, was the realization that I would be the next voice on the line, the next warning, the next haunting echo waiting in the darkness. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that someday someone else would dial the number, and I would be there, waiting for them, ready to whisper, "1 month. That's all you have left."